Now welcome to another Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked you to grade or rank Ahsoka Tano, or regrade or rank her in the wake of her own series here. We'll then of course be comparing these new results against the old ones and seeing where she now ranks overall. But before any of that, you can already head down to nominate and or vote for which character we'll do next. All you gotta do is respond to my pinned comment below with a character name, or vote with a thumbs up if the one you'd like to see is already listed. And though you are, as always, free to nominate whichever character you want, I do think there are a few from the Ahsoka series, or even back from Andor that we haven't done yet, that would certainly make for some interesting polls and videos. But anyway, let's get to the results for Ahsoka, where we'll see that 24% of voters gave her an A, 40% then put her into the B tier, 22% gave her a C, which left 8% to give her a D, and a final 6% to give her an F. And as you'll now see on your screen, before this revote, Ahsoka was in 9th place overall with a score of 4.55. That is very impressive indeed to be in the top 10 Star Wars characters of all time. But after it, and after doing the math here on the new poll, and of course considering A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Ahsoka's score drops down to a 3.68 and drops her way down into 52nd place overall. And almost a bit ironically, you could say, it means she is currently 1/100th of a point ahead of Sabine Wren. And I say currently because certainly Sabine is also eligible for a revote after the Ahsoka series, and I do think we will get some different results out of her. And honestly, this feels a bit harsh, and there are no doubt several factors at play here, including the most recent thing she's been in, which is obviously, of course, her own series, and clearly not everyone was impressed with her in it. I do think there are also those who are basing this almost solely off of that live-action appearance because they never saw her in Clone Wars or in Rebels, or they are just sort of valuing live action more, if you will. There were also some, and I could tell this from the comments I left, but there were those who thought this was ranking the show itself, despite me already having put up a poll and trying to make it clear with the question on this poll that it was about the character. But of course, for a lot of people, this poll no doubt just kind of pops up as they're scrolling through their feed. They don't really look at it too much, they just cast their vote, maybe leave a quick comment, and that's that. Not saying this had a massive impact on the results. It may have had virtually none, but it is worth noting at least a few people thought this was ranking the show apparently. So maybe in a couple months we could vote on Ahsoka again and see if perhaps some have softened their stance towards her just a bit, or let what she has been in the past, those multiple seasons of Clone Wars in particular, maybe let that weigh a little more heavily once again and her score will rise back up a bit. But for now, these are indeed her official results. And so now let's get to some of your comments and potentially learn why the massive drop. But before that, I do want to once again quickly say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, or watches these or any of my videos. It is all greatly appreciated. Also a huge thank you to those who support my channels on Patreon. Thank you very much for that. And so now on to, once again, the top rated comment to kick things off, which this time comes to us from Derek Lopez, who said, "She's a far more compelling character in the Clone Wars and Rebels than she was in live action. Ashley Eckstein will always be Ahsoka." And I think you kind of hit on the biggest problem I may have had with Ahsoka in this series, which is that there wasn't anything really compelling about her. There wasn't a whole lot to her or to her story in this. The whole thing completely hinged on one episode in the middle, on the Anakin episode. And if you take that out, did she even have any type of story arc or anything in this? I mean, they didn't even do anything with her promise to find Ezra, the one she had made after he saved her in the World Between Worlds back in Rebels. And that really could have and should have been used for a few different reasons. One being, it puts her in the same sort of or kind of a similar boat as Sabine, where she wants to find Ezra for personal reasons and could cause some kind of personal conflicts within her, the same way it did for Sabine, as well as just kind of add another dynamic to their conflict over finding Ezra. You could have Sabine throw that promise back in her face at some point when she wants to give up or wants to destroy the map or whatever it might be, assuming of course Ahsoka had told her about that promise beforehand. It also could help explain the biggest sort of plot hole in this entire show, which we'll get to in a bit. Either way, that promise, that shared experience between them, between Ezra and Ahsoka, opens the door for the show to explore a connection between our titular character and what the show is in large part all about, that is, about finding Ezra. But instead, if you haven't seen Rebels or know Ahsoka or anything like that, you have no real idea why or how these two, Ahsoka and Ezra, how they even know each other or why they hug and seem happy to see each other when they are reunited. The show at no point establishes anything between those two. Hell, it barely establishes much between Sabine and Ezra other than that recording she watches at the very beginning, and of course her just being obsessed with finding him. Alright, and now on to this comment from Aaron Keegan, who said, I gave it some thought and I gave her an F. There's only one reason why I've done so, and it's nothing to do necessarily with her acting or any semblance of character development, but rather my own inability to understand her actions in the very first scene we see her. Ahsoka is well aware that the map to Thrawn is dangerous, and she knows that she is not the only one searching for it, as evidenced by the arrival of those droids when she leaves its burial site. So why then does she not destroy the orb in the same fashion that Baylan does when they are done deciphering its contents? There are only two things that orb leads to. One is an old friend who may or may not still be alive, and the other is a supposed galaxy-level threat who could potentially return and reform the Empire. Many have rightly criticized Sabine for staking the fate of the galaxy on the slim chance that she might see her friend again, so why are we not also doing the same for Ahsoka? The entire reason why Thrawn is back now is because Ahsoka, for some reason, never destroyed the seemingly only map to his location. She put the entire fate of the galaxy at risk from the moment she stepped on screen, and that is unforgivable. And this is, as I was kind of talking about before, it's the biggest kind of plot hole in the show, one that perhaps that promise to Ezra could have been used to explain or fix. That could be the reason why she didn't immediately destroy the map, as she really probably should have. And that would be because she too didn't want to give up on the hope of finding Ezra and, again, keeping that promise she made to him. Instead, if you've seen Rebels, you can kind of maybe infer that's the reason she doesn't destroy it, but if you haven't, all you know is Ahsoka will later give a lecture to Sabine multiple times about not destroying the map, or that she should destroy it if we find it, when she already had a chance to do that from the very start, and instead was the one who brought it to Sabine in the first place, because she was somehow the only person who could decipher it. I mean, really? I get that Sabine is very highly intelligent. She even once designed a weapon that basically melted Beskar. But there had to be someone else that could figure out to twist the ball a couple times to unlock the map. And Ahsoka should have never taken it to someone who had such a personal stake in all of this. It makes no sense whatsoever, and makes the character of Ahsoka seem so inconsistent, to put it mildly. Again, she's lecturing Sabine over something she already failed at. Her training of Sabine in the first place also kind of makes her inconsistent, considering all the attachments that Sabine has, which, if you go back to Mando Season 2, that was the reason she gave for not wanting to train Grogu. She warned about how dangerous it could be to train somebody with attachments, yet she had already done that herself. And then, in the end, Ahsoka is just kind of okay with everything Sabine has done, despite all the consequences or repercussions of her actions, despite the fact we could now have a new war breaking out that could kill millions, if not billions of people, all because of what Sabine did and because of what Ahsoka, allowed to kind of happen in the first place by not destroying that map. I don't know, there's just a lot of things that don't really make sense when it comes to her actions in this series when you stop and think about it. And I do feel like it really, really hurts the character. And I know some will take to the comments to try to explain or defend her actions in this. But in my eyes, there is really no way around the fact that she makes some really bad, uncharacteristic choices. And so I'm not surprised to see her fall a bit in these rankings. Though again, I don't know if she's like the 52nd best character that we've done so far. In other words, I don't think she should have fallen quite that low. Alright, let's now move on to this comment from Kick Blava, who said, for me, there's two versions of Ahsoka, the Clone Wars and Rebels version that I enjoy and is a consistent character, then the live-action version who has grown to be far too strict and stoic that it might as well be a different person just like Sabine's live-action version. And this kind of goes along with what I was talking about before, about how in that middle episode, the Anakin World Between Worlds episode, whatever you want to call it, that was clearly meant to be the whole kind of crux of her story. That was obvious by how grim and stoic she was early on, that Dave Filoni really wanted to sell it when she turned into Ahsoka the White. He wanted her to start as kind of low as possible. She is almost unrecognizable at the start in terms of just how kind of grim and stoic she is, how there is no fun in anything she does or says. And he wanted that so the change in her would feel profound when, again, she dons the white robes and becomes Ahsoka the White, whatever that actually means beyond just her putting on white robes and being a happier person again. And honestly, I don't know that she's really all that different after the change anyway. I don't know, other than her smiling a bit more and the aforementioned forgiving Sabine for her very, very big mistake. I don't know that she still felt like Ahsoka from the days gone by. And don't get me wrong, I think Rosario Dawson was a good choice to play this character, about as good of a choice as you're going to find. She seemed extremely committed from everything I've read and heard or every interview she's done. She seems like she put in the time and effort and the work, and she did the best she could. She did a good job, relatively speaking. But I don't know if I was personally ever sold that this was the same Ahsoka from the animated stuff. There was certainly a sense of disconnect. And I think that partially just comes from Ashley Eckstein just giving a different kind of energy to the performance than Rosario Dawson was, mainly just kind of based on those voices. Those are two radically different voices, and they just feel different. But anyway, let's move on to this comment from Mr. McGee, who said, Ahsoka is an unfortunate victim of all the issues that plague Star Wars. She's been resurrected not once, but twice. She's been shoehorned in several places she didn't belong. And ultimately, she's become a fan fiction level OC. It's a shame because her character's journey in the Clone Wars is fantastic, but has nonetheless been tarnished by her overuse. Although I haven't always felt this way and have gone back and forth on the issue, she ultimately should have died in Clone Wars, just like George originally wanted. It would have better supported the overall story rather than opening Pandora's box when it comes to fan fiction treatment in what's supposed to be official canon. I give her a reluctant C, maybe a C+. I wish I could score her higher, but her character has been sorely misused. In the Clone Wars alone, she'd be a B+. In Rebels, she'd be a B or B-. But Ahsoka Series, ironically a series named after her, degraded her to a very generous D. Her plot armor is weighing her down. And honestly, I don't think she needed to die in Clone Wars, though that was indeed the original George Lucas plan or what he wanted. I think her death, or almost to death, I guess, in Rebels, in the Twilight of the Apprentice episode, would have been a better place to end her story, an actual confrontation with Darth Vader. And I was happy with what Rebels did with her kind of overall. We got like one season and then like an extra episode in season 4. And her dying there against Vader, as I've talked about before, it would have made her another tragic part of the story of Anakin Skywalker. And so a big part of the reason why I was excited for the Ahsoka series was to see if Dave and company could make her more. If, once out from under the shadow of Anakin and Vader, would there be an interesting story with her and her alone to it? Could she kind of stand on her own? And though obviously the show is meant to have a second season, so anything is possible yet out of the character, don't get me wrong. All this entire first season did, and I'm going to go back to it yet again, but everything this season did with the character, it happened in that 5th episode with Anakin, and that was about it. And thus, yeah, it almost does come off feeling fan fiction-y, because fan fictions tend to just use characters to do cool things with them, because that's all they really care about. They care about it just kind of being cool, right? They tend to be less focused on character development and story, and more focused on things happening because they want them to happen. They are very much and then style storytelling, with the and then part being and then something cool happens. And so yeah, after the season, I do understand why Ahsoka has dropped in these rankings. I don't know if she, again, should have quite dropped as far as she did. She has a terrific story in Clone Wars, but I get it, and I can only hope that, since we know we're going to see her again, right? That maybe Dave can figure out something truly interesting to do with her in the possible next season of Ahsoka, or wherever we see her next. Something that kind of justifies bringing her back from the dead, or very near dead on a few different occasions now. But anyway, let's get to a few final comments before wrapping this one up. Starting with this one from Lee Walker, who said, B. Ahsoka had a big impact in driving the story arcs of other characters like Anakin, Rex, Ezra, Kanan, etc., whilst also having a great development arc herself despite the rocky Clone War start. I'm still not convinced by Dawson's version though, whether that's her fault or not. Then there's also this one from Marlena M, who said, Ahsoka just feels like such a fanfic character. I felt that way too with the Clone Wars, but less than now. The show tells us that she's important, helping the Rebels, helping Luke, but her impact on the greater Star Wars universe is next to none. She's connected to all these important characters, but if she didn't exist, they would not be impacted at all. She should have died during Order 66, in my humble opinion. Tragic, but a fitting end. She's overstaying her welcome. We then move on to this one from the Brummy, who said, Luke will always be an A because we can just choose to ignore you-know-what. So my love for Ahsoka won't change after this. When I think of Ahsoka, I think of Ashley Eckstein's voice over a wonderful animated character. That will never change, even if I had liked the Ahsoka series. Next up here, this one from Emperor Cubone, who simply said, live-action Ahsoka alone could probably fall to a C, but animated, she's a high A, therefore she comes out as a B. And then we have this one from Gabby, who said, For me, she was an A before her show and still is now. There's just so much content in the Clone Wars, Tales of the Jedi, Rebels to make her one of the most rounded and developed characters, and she has a coherent arc that so many people could relate to. We lived so many emotional moments through her and her journey. In my opinion, the first season of Ahsoka wasn't all amazing, but we needed to see how she would deal with Anakin becoming Darth Vader, and I think the show succeeded in her characterization, even if sometimes slightly awkward in the execution. And finally, we have this one from Emily Rocket, who said, "After the Clone Wars, I would have given Ahsoka a solid A tier. Ahsoka had amazing character development, realistic flaws to overcome, and a warm and very likable personality. In Ahsoka's own season, she has very little character development, no realistic flaws to relate to, and she appears to have lost all warmth and is a cold and passionless person. This Ahsoka, on her own, deserves a C tier or less, but the Clone Wars Ahsoka is the only reason I'm giving her a B." Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of Ahsoka. How would you rank or rate her? And do you think this was maybe a bit too harsh of a drop overall, or was this deserved? Or, of course, you can also nominate and or vote for which character we do next. Whatever you choose to do, though, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.